We're going to take a quick look at ASCII File Access in C++, and I'm going to use a free compiler. It's based on the Linux GCC compiler known as Bloodshed, or Dev C++. Just Google for it. You can find it's a free download. And the same code, I'll try to keep it standard or generic, plain vanilla, so you'll be able to do this in Visual Studio as well. There are subtle differences between different compilers, and sometimes the syntax that works in one doesn't work in another. But what we're doing right now would work in both. And as a matter of fact, later on I'll do it in Visual Studio for those people who have Visual Studio. All right, and it's just based on the Linux GCC compiler and G++, the C++ compiler, the open source compiler. So I'm going to just make a new project and console application, and we're going to call this ASCII File Access, because that's what we're going to be looking at today. And we'll go ahead and make it. And alright, so Bloodshed kind of makes a template for us. We're just going to start out, keep it simple as a console app. Okay, and we need a few items to illustrate the purpose of the first thing I'm going to do is we'll look at just writing some strings to a file, and then after that we'll reading from the file, writing to the file, and then after that we'll look at creating a class, and we'll look at serializing the class. When you serialize a class, you take all of the data members in the class and you write them into a file, and then later you load them back in the exact same order. First, you need to include the header file fstream in your project to enable writing to and reading from files. You may also wish to include ifstream and string. In the template, Bloodshed will give us C standard library and ifstream, which you need for C in and C out. And we're going to use using namespace standard, and once we do that, we won't have to, otherwise we'd have to do like std and colon and explicitly scope in to C out and so forth. But because of this, we won't have to. That'll just kind of change the scope a little bit. And then just a couple of more includes that we'll be using. All right, we need to include some more header files, and we're going to take advantage of the string class later on, so we're going to include string. And also, we're going to include fstream, and fstream is the header file that you need to do all of your file access, to stream in and stream out to a file, at least using standard I/O, kind of like the old standard C++ way or IBM way. In our first few examples, we will write and read some data primitives starting with string literals and then moving on to some simple C++ character arrays. Now in this first example, we're going to use some data primitives, but later we'll use strings and different classes of objects. So data primitive, we're going to have one called name, and be careful, you don't want to hit a keyword. Sometimes depending on the API and the IDE that you're working in, name might be a specific keyword, so you might want to do all caps, or you might want to do I'll tell you what, I'm going to use this person name, and we're just going to make a simple character array of 25 characters. Probably we don't need an array much larger than that. And we're going to do, let's see, occupation, location. All right, so these are simple strings. All strings are pretty much arrays of type character, but later on when we use a string class, there are additional functions and capabilities along with the constructor and destructor built into the string class that give us more advanced capabilities or features than simply using a simple data type, a character array. But for now, just to make our point or to illustrate the use of ifstream and ofstream objects, we'll use simple character strings. Let's see, what do we do? Person name, occupation, location, and we'll do references. Let's see, we're doing like a simple database to hold some info there. Alright, so we have 4 data primitives, arrays of type character. Now let's go in here and make sort of a menu. So and what are we going to call our program? Personnel database 1.0 or something, who knows. Alright, and we'll drop down a line. Let's create a console menu from which to call our file access functions. We'll fast forward through this since it's just a basic menu.
Alright, so when we launch the program, so let's go ahead and start a menu, which means I'm going to come up here, and I could use a single character for input, But if I do that, the problem is if they type more than that single character, it overflows the buffer and causes problems like looping or even crashing. So a lot of times what I'll come in, this is by no means completely bulletproof, but I'll use, again, a simple character array or a string. And then you can switch on the first character of that. Remember, you can't switch on an entire string, but you can switch on a single character. And that does give you a little bit of bulletproofing if you do that instead of using a single character. Whatever your preference is, but we're just going to make a simple menu in the console, so basically just a while true loop. And we need to give it a sentinel value. And so here's where choice comes in, and we're going to say the first character, well, it's not equal to Q, to quit. Alright, so that'll be our sentinel value to break out of or bust out of that while true loop. And now we need to go ahead and display the choices that the player has, or the user. And so let's see. Call this main menu. Okay. And we will do that. And let's see, let's go down. Let's see, we'll do this, and let me grab this. And we'll just kind of copy and paste a few items in here. Let's add a pipe symbol, be kind of a little box there. Alright, then we just want to add some spaces here. Okay. And let's add our menu choices. And we're going to, just like I said, for a simple database, think about the things we need to do. Eventually we'll have to create a person. And what are the things we'll want to build a person, or create a person, and we'll want to save a person, and load a person, and display a person, and enter info on a person. So those are sort of the things we want to think about that we'll want to do in this menu. And for now, I'm just going to say, create a person, and throw that in our menu. Okay. And we'll just copy and paste this all the way. You know, remember the basic parts of the menu. We've gone over this before in Java and C++, but basically a while true loop, you have to display the menu, take some input so the player can, or the user can decide what they want to do, and then process it in a switch statement. So create a person, once you create a person, let's see, we'll call it edit information for person. Okay. Let me kind of back up here and give myself a little more space. Edit information for a person. Okay. That'll be our longest entry in the menu there. Bear with me. We'll get moving here. Just kind of trying to start from scratch and make a simple menu. Alright, so what do we need to do? We have to create a person. We have to be able to edit information on the person. What are the other things we need to do? Well, we want to be able to display records, right? So we have to display a person. Display a person. And we need to be able to save a person. And then we have to be able to load a person. Alright. So later we'll want to write a class, and then we'll look at how to save the data from a class to a file, and then load it from a file, and then put it back into an object that we built from a class. But for now, to keep it simple, well, we just go over the basic parts of file access. We're just going to, even before we build the class, going to look at how we would save that data, just kind of in a raw fashion. Alright, and we should add, let me just add one more in here. We should tell them what they need to do to exit. I guess that would be more user-friendly, yeah, so making them simply guess. Alright, so Q to quit. There's our setup. Alright, so this is our menu that we'll display. That's what the player will see. Okay, so that's part of it, but now, and I just, for aesthetic purposes, I'll add 2 lines and tab over, so it kind of makes the cursor blink in the right, lined up under the menu there. But alright, so now we need to take some input based on what they want to do, and we're going to store that in choice. There's our simple character array that we set up. And now we need to process that input, so we're going to add a simple selection structure, just a switch here. Remember, switch is a lot more simplistic than if and else. You can do crazy awesome logic with if and else, and call functions and all kinds of stuff in the parentheses of if and else. But with a switch statement, you're limited to some very simple things. For instance, I can't switch on an entire string, but I can switch on a single character, the first character. In this case, that's all I want. Or a number, or something like that. So we'll build our cases, and in this example, the cases are going to be in single quotes because it's a character. And so for each case, we want to follow it with a break, so that we don't, if it weren't for that break, it would go down and it would repeat all the cases beneath that. Okay, and we'll add a default as well. And that'll simply be sort of our catch-all. We'll say, in case I type banana or some craziness, invalid input. A little feedback.
Now I need to prototype, define, and call our functions and methods. Why don't we just call our functions what we said here? So create a person, edit person, display person. Now we're stubbing this out. We haven't made these functions yet. Save person. So you don't want to compile it until we actually prototype it and lay down the empty function definitions with the signatures. But for now, we're just working on our menu. Load person, and we don't really need to do anything for quit. Other than, I don't know, it's kind of redundant, but you could say exiting main menu or some such thing like that if you had other submenus or a root menu you were going out to. Okay, that's just a sentinel value there. So we want to prototype all these functions now in the menu. So again, create person, edit person, display person, save person, So I'm going to go up here and we'll just add a comment tag. These are our globals right here. So our globals. We want to put our function prototypes here and go ahead and void create person, and let's see what else it was, void display person. I think before that was what, edit person. Yeah, edit person. And then let's see, we had create person, edit person, display person, and then save person and load person. Alright, so save person, load person. Alright, so we prototyped all of our functions. And now I'm just going to copy and paste the prototypes, come down here under main, and we'll lay down our definitions. Alright, and that's easy enough. Just take off the semicolon, add open and closing brace, and a little space. Hey, I'm a poet and I don't even know it. But anyway, we'll go down, we'll add all that. Take off the semicolon, add closing brace, and take off the semicolon, add closing brace. And then this isn't necessary, but I do this. It helps. Sometimes other people that read your code appreciate this. You don't have to do it. It doesn't really change the syntax or anything. A lot of people don't waste their time, but sometimes it makes your code easier to follow, where you break one function and end another. And some IDEs even, if you use like Visual Basic or some languages, they even kind of do this automatically. They just add like little lines. Or, some compilers and interpreters and things kind of display the code in that fashion. Alright, but we'll just do that, and that kind of hopefully makes it easier to follow, easier to see. So you can see where one function ends and another function begins there. So we have now just an empty, well, I can't even talk. We have now just an empty template there. Okay. Wow. Anyway, we have an empty template, in which case we can go ahead and start looking at file access. Now let's code a basic function for writing ASCII data to a file. Remember, ASCII stands for American Standard Code for Information Interchange, if you were wondering. In other words, just plain text. This will be a 4-step process. First, we'll create an instance of ofstream, then we'll open or create a file, we'll stream data to the file, and then we'll close the ofstream object. So the first thing we want to do is save data to a file and create the file. We can't, load data or read a file until we first create it and save something to it. So again, the first thing we need to do is make sure that you have included fstream. You'll need fstream to utilize both an ofstream and ifstream object for writing to a file and reading from a file. Then the next thing we'll do is we'll go down to our function definition for save a person, and here's what we'll add the required code. And you don't have to, but this is probably something you want to enclose and try and catch. And remember before when we were talking about try and catch, it's sort of like if and else, if you're unfamiliar with try and catch. But an operation that might is prone to generate errors or problems. If you put it inside of a try block, this is sort of like an if. And if everything's okay, if everything's successful, if you have permission to save the file and there's room to save the file and you can find the file and load the file and save to it, then the code in these curly braces will execute. And if something goes wrong, then the catch is sort of like the else, alright? Sort of like an if and an else. And you simply catch an exception. I'm just going to catch a plain old vanilla exception here, and you can call the instance name whatever you like. But the code also goes in curly braces. I'm just going to see out, I'm just going to say a little statement here. We'll say error could not save person. Alright, we'll say error could not save, or we'll say file error. How about that? Alright, so if something went wrong of what we're trying in the try block, then the catch block would display this error message. And that would, other than simply the program just crashing and the user having no idea what happened. So it's kind of nice to put things in try and catch blocks. Now, what do we want to do inside the try block? Well, inside the try block, ofstream, we need to create an instance of ofstream. And again, if I could type and talk at the same time. Alright, and I'm going to call this data file. And then what you want to do, you can actually also open a file in the constructor, but just to illustrate the method by itself, I'm going to call the open method on that object. And I need to pass in a string or a file name, and then there are iOS flags. and they go with is : and then there's lots of different flags. There's app to append, and that would be if the file already existed and I wanted to write data at the end of it without erasing the contents that were there. In other words, let's say that I were saving high scores, and I already had 8 high scores, and I wanted to save the next high score, but I didn't want to erase the previous 8. I just wanted to append it or add it to the bottom of those high scores. Then I would use is_append. Okay, but otherwise, the default would be is_out. For ofstream, if I didn't even use an is flag, it would be out, and that would simply, write over or create and delete. If there was a file there with the same name, it would create and delete that file. Alright, so we just have to give it a name, and we'll call it data1.file in this example. And that will create the file. So data1.file, is_out are the flags. And now we simply need to write the data to it, and we can stream it using the stream operator. Fstream gives us that ability, along with ifstream. We have both of those up here again. Remember, this gives you cout, cin, the stream operator, and then fstream. So now, pretty much in the same way you would do that to console in and console out with cout and cin, you can take the stream operator and now stream data or text to a file. Now I just need to take my instance of the ofstream class, in this case data file, and I can use the stream operator to tell it which direction I want the data to flow. So we just point the arrows where the data should flow. In this case, the data file object itself represents the file that I've opened. Okay, so data1.file, the text file, and here's what I want to flow into it, or to write to it. Okay, so and you also need to pick a delimiter, and some people use semicolons, commas, the pipe symbol, whatever. One of the things I do that's pretty easy, I just use a line. A lot of people do this. I'll add a line, add a line, add a line. That's how you tell one item of data from another, one variable from another. And so if I wanted to do this, then I could say name Charles, Germany. I'd stream that and then basically add a line. Okay, I could have done all this in one set of quotes, but I guess just to illustrate that this is the delimiter, I'll make it an extra or additional write with the stream. Okay, so we'll do name, and let's see, occupation. We'll do adventurer. Okay, and now again I want to take my data file object. Same thing, just streaming the data. So name, occupation, location, and we will be in the kingdom of Hyrule. Ha 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 ha. Princess Zelda. And last but not least, references. In this case, who would my references be? Link and Princess Zelda. If you like Twilight Princess as opposed to Skyward Sword, then maybe Midna too, who knows. Alright, so that anyway, this represents writing 4 lines of data using lines as a delimiter to the file. Okay? And then finally, when I come down, I just want to close that object. I call close. I don't really want to leave that file open unless there's a reason to. And there's a greater chance if something were to happen, I lose power and I don't have a UPS and my computer crashes, or who knows. It may be unlikely, but things could always happen. And if you have that file open, there's a much greater chance that your data can be corrupt if you're writing to the file and then something happens. So if you're done with the file, it's always a good idea to close the object, until you need to write to it again, and then you can always, if you need to, open it and write to it again. And then if everything is successful inside of our try block, we'll just add a little feedback statement to tell us that. We'll simply say, hey, success, data was saved to file. Alright, data was saved to file. Alright, so we have our try, we have our catch. Again, go through the process, just a real quick review. What do we need? I needed fstream up here to give me ofstream and ifstream. I haven't used ifstream yet, but we've used ofstream. And then to save data to the file, what do? We built an instance of the ofstream class. We called the open method. We talked about the is flags, append, out, in. There's a lot of other ones. If you use Visual Studio, you get IntelliSense and you'll pop up and you'll be able to see them all. The name of the file, which is just a string, and you could convert, C_str to convert a string to a C string, or a character array, or whatever there. I mean, there's all kinds of things I guess you could do there, but just an example. And now we're just taking these string literals and using a line as a delimiter and saving them to the file. and we're closing. Okay, we haven't done anything else yet. The rest of the program is just empty. It's just an empty shell with a menu. But let's go ahead and run it and call save person. And when we do, let's go look at the file that gets created, okay, with this process. And let's see, duplicate case value. Oh, you're probably screaming, "Hey, Germany, you forgot to change your cases." Anyway, yeah, why don't we do that? Duplicate case value. Display. Save. Let's see. Load and quit. There we go. Change our cases there. Alright, so we got our menu, our empty shell. Let's go run it. I'm thinking about file access, not menus. Anyway, now we have a menu. Yay! Let's call our function. Success! Data was saved to the file. So let's go see. We'll go into the project folder. Come down here, keep this open with the project folder. And here's our file, data1.file. And we're going to open it. We'll just open it with Notepad. And here's our string literals along with our line delimiters. So name Charles Germany, occupation adventure, location Hyrule, references link Princess Zelda and Midna. So that verifies the write. Now let's take a look at the read. Now let's code a basic function for reading ASCII data from a file. This too is basically a four-step process. We create an instance of ifstream, we open a file, we stream data from the file, and then we close the ifstream object. For the read, we'll kind of need to finish up two of these functions. Of course, we'll need the function to load from the file, but that's not going to necessarily display for us a person. So we also need to kind of code a function to display a person once we load the info. Now let's look at coding the DisplayPerson function. We'll fast forward since it's pretty basic stuff.
So I'm going to do this one first. I'm just going to have it put out here. Let's see. Person information. Alright, and let's see. We will... In fact, I think I'll just clear the screen too. Yeah, why not? Alright, we'll clear the screen, and then we'll drop down a couple lines and let's display our person information there, okay? And name, and what we're going to do is we're going to use these globals that we declared up here for just such a purpose. So to remind you, let me hop up here, and remember we had person name, occupation, location, references. These are simple. Later we'll use strings, and we'll also convert this to a class, but again, I'm just trying to go through kind of a simple example, and then we'll look at other ways of ASCII file access. So for the name, it was simply person name, okay? And right now, they'll have a null value until they're set, or until we load something into them from the file. So name, occupation, and that was occupation. And let's see, we had location, which was just called location. And we had references. I spelled that right, references, yeah, which is simply called references. Alright. And let's see, I'll just add a line and drop down a little bit there too. Okay, and I just want to drop down too, just one. And let's add a line and a tab over here, just put those on. Alright, so now we've got the ability to display a person, although we have, until we actually load the info from a file, there wouldn't be anything really in these character arrays yet. Let's make sure that our syntax is okay there. Alright, and now with that, that'll give us a way to display a person or a person's info.
Now let's code the load person function. Now the process of loading a person, loading that information file, is going to be very similar to the process of saving that information to a file. And it's a process where potentially a lot could go wrong, right? We might lack permission to save to the directory or the partition where we're trying to save to. We may not have sufficient space, might not be able to find the file, so we want to enclose it inside of try and catch blocks. And as a matter of fact, in Java wouldn't even let you do a file operation without putting it inside of try and catch. C++, it's more of a suggestion, but it's something that we should do. We want to, be able to make our program a bit more forgiving if something goes wrong, or a bit more friendly to the debugger or the programmer or the user. Okay, so, and now I'm just going to kind of tab over a little bit, add a line, and we'll just say error or maybe file error, and unable to load data is what we'll say in the catch. Alright, that brings us to the try. And for the try, all we really need to do is build an instance now of ifstream. So the ifstream class, and we'll call it what we did previously when we were saving. we called the upstream object data file up here. Let me scroll up here. All right, so upstream was data file. Well, we'll call the ifstream object data file as well. And then I'm going to call data file and open, that use the open method. And the syntax, the arguments are much the same. First, it would take the name of the file, and that's data1.file. And then the next is IS flags, and the default is always going to be in for an ifstream object, just like the default is out for an upstream object. Remember, there's append, and there's a lot of other ones. If you use Visual Studio, look at IntelliSense, and they'll pop up, and you'll see all the different IS flags that go with ifstream and upstream objects. So anyway, we built an instance of it, we instantiated it, we called the open method on it to open the file. Now we can actually begin to load information from that file once we have it open. So we have these global character arrays up here, right? Remember? Let me go up past the prototypes, and there's person name, occupation, location, and references. Okay. So we can load the information into those. They're there and they're ready now for us to utilize. So the first one was person name. And typically, what most people do with if there are no spaces in the variable, you can simply stream the data. Okay, so I could take data file, and if I were to stream the data to person name like this, okay, now there is a problem with that, not persona name, person name, but there's a problem with that, and that is up here. If you look at the data I wrote, it has spaces in it. Name, space, so forth, occupation, and so forth, all that. All right, when I wrote that to the file. So there's a problem with that. If I just do this and I stream it, just like if I were using cin, it would chop things off after the space. Now there's a way around that. We can use a function called getLine and cin.ignore, and I'll show you how to do that a little later. But for now, just to kind of illustrate it, we'll stream data this way. This would be fine if I had no spaces, but because I have spaces, you'll notice it will chop some of the data off. I'm just going to stream the data all the way down to the remaining three variables. So person name, occupation, was our next one, location, and references. References, okay. And then just like with when we were saving the file, I want to close the file when I'm no longer using it. So data file.close in this example, or in this case. Okay, and that would take care of, saving all of that. Now, when I did this, I included name, occupation, location, reference. So it's going to be redundant when it displays. But later we'll modify that too, so it works better with the display function. All right, so we have our function here. So let's do this. I'm going to rebuild it, check our syntax, and let's run it. Okay, and we've created that file. All right, so let's try to load it, and we're going to load a person. And everything looks good there. And you know what I'm going to do again, just as a thought. I'm going to add a statement here. Just provide a little feedback so you can see. I don't know. I'm trying to make this as transparent, and let's look at using getLine instead of the data stream operator. Let's clarify this just a little bit further. And so to do this, I'm just going to save the data, since now we've written these items in the display function. So all that will be saved to the file, or that should be saved to the file, is this, right? And then when we call the display function, it should display that. Alright, I'm going to run it. And here, now I'm going to go ahead and save a person and quit. And we're going to go look at the file real quick, see what was saved in the file. Alright, so it saved it with the spaces and all. It was written to the file, added the line as a delimiter. But now, watch what will happen. It'll chop things off where the spaces are, because I didn't use the getLine function. So if I were to load a person, it loaded successfully, but then when I display the person, you notice Charles, and then the next output statement, which should be my occupation, is Germany, an adventurer, okay, and Hyrule. So I have an issue there. I have a problem there. It's chopping things off at the space. So to avoid that, instead what I can do is use getLine. Now, if I use getLine, instead of character arrays, I need to use string objects. So I'm going to come up here and we're going to change these to string objects. Alright, make them strings. Oops, there's two brackets over. Alright, so now they're strings. And let's see, let's come down here and go to load here. Alright, so here we don't want to do this anymore as far as streaming like that, but we're going to use getLine with our strings. Alright, so getLine, and it takes, let's pass in data file. We need an instance of ifstream, and then let's take our object. Our first one was what? Person name. Now that's our new string object. Alright, and then let's do the same all the way down for each item. So, person name, occupation, location, and references. There we go, okay. And then everything else will leave the same, but what we're trying to do is get it so that we can handle, the spacing information in the data. Make that display properly or correctly, so to speak. Alright, so I'm going to run it again. And I'm going to go ahead and load with the same data from the file. Loaded the file, and let's go ahead and display. Now it displays properly. Charles space Germany, Adventure Hyrule, Link comma space, Princess Zelda comma space, Midna, which is what we want. Now let's code the edit person function. With that complete, now we need a way to edit a person at runtime. So we're going to come in here and I'm just going to add, actually I'm also going to clear the screen here. Might want to do this with each menu. I don't know, it depends. However you like the aesthetics, so to speak. And edit person menu. No, we're not even going to make it a menu. We'll just make it a dialog. Okay. So we're going to do that. And let's see, what do we need to do first? We need to ask them for a name. Alright, and we'll simply drop a line, tab over, ask them for a name. And I want to think of the output first. Now when we ask for a name, here's the thing. I could do this. I could say cin, and what do we have? Person name, is that our string up here? Yeah. I could do that, but again I'm going to have a similar issue or problem. If I do that and I take, I type in Charles space Germany or whatever, something with spaces, it's going to chop it off. The buffer is going to get confused where the spaces are, and it won't end up storing the data like I want or taking the data like I want. So sometimes when you use the getLine function, you also have to use cin.ignore. Unless I'm only going to use single word values without spaces, I don't necessarily want to do this, cin. But what I can do instead is I can use getLine. Just like we did previously, we use getLine with our instance of ifstream, the data file object we built. Well, I can use it also with console.in or cin and just pass in my string object, person name. I can do it just like that. Okay. Now there's one more caveat or issue here, and that is the first time I do this is kind of a little buggy or weird in C++, the way this works, but the very first time I do this, there'll be sort of like an extra character, or extra line sort of in the buffer, and what'll happen is it'll grab the next character off of the input buffer, and so it'll kind of make it skip the next get line that I call or the next statement. So there's a function we can use called cin.ignore, and I only have to do it one time, but I want to call that function before I do this. Alright, so I'm going to say cin.ignore. Now I'm not going to do this every time. You don't want to do that, otherwise it'll chop off the first character of whatever they type in. But the very first time you use the function, you want to use cin.ignore, and then after that, just move on and use getLine as you wish. So in other words, I need to do this over and over, 3 more times. I'm going to copy it, and I need to come up here, and this time the piece of information that we wish to solicit from the player or the user is going to be the occupation. Okay, and I want to store it in the appropriate variable. And I'm just going to get real pasty. more white and pasty and nerdy than I already am, but no. Alright, so, and I just want to do this all the way down. Sans the cin.ignore. I don't have to do that. I only have to do that once. If I did it, if I did it a second time, it would not do what I want. It would end up chopping off the first character of the next line of input that the player put in. Right, location, and last one was references, and references. Okay. So what have we got here? Name, occupation, location, and references. That looks good. Edit a person. Now let's recode save person to use string variables instead of string literals. I just want to take the same thing. I want to stream that string information, that string data, instead of these hard-coded string literals here. So person name, occupation, location, and references. Let's compile and test it now. I just have to compile it and test it. And I'm going to go here and rebuild the project. Typo! Why didn't you tell me? Nah. Alright, anyway. Hahaha, just kidding. Alright. So syntax is good. So now we have a means of entering the data in. And let's go ahead and, let's see, this was our file before, but we'll simply remake the file. Alright, and let's run our program. Alright, so we haven't got to writing the person class yet, so we don't need to create a person yet. We just have those global variables. But let's edit the information for a person. So, Charles, Germany, and the occupation, adventurer, and Daytona Beach, and Princess Zelda. We're crossing the universes. Midna, Link. Those would be my references. Alright, and now let's save the person. Success data was saved to file. Go look at the file, and then we'll load the person. Alright, so here, Charles, Germany, saved it even with the spaces. That's what we wanted. And let's see if we can't load the file now. And I'll go ahead and load the file. Success data was loaded, and display a person. And again, it displays just like we want. Okay? So that's just an example of using getLine instead of cin, so that you can also capture spaces. Don't forget that the very first time, to kind of handle that little buffer bug or whatever you want to call it, you want to use cin.ignore to kind of chop off the, and then you don't have to use it the rest of the way through. Just call getLine. Don't use ignore, but